All right, we've talked about Erickson several times in this class. I've actually given it to you in many different formats too. I just keep getting different tables and things. Erickson has had a lot of influence on positive psychology, even though he wasn't really part of the movement even back in the 40s. But one of the things that he offered that is really important in adolescence is this idea that we're searching for our identity. We're trying to figure out who we are, what we want to spend our time doing, um, who we want to, be friends with, and what kinds of hobbies and things that we want to do. What's our vocation? How do we want to identify ethnically? These kinds of things are all part of that identity crisis that everybody goes through during adolescence and usually resolved by the end of their 20s. So for some of us, it's 15 or 20 years of our lives where we're really trying to settle out this identity crisis. You'll notice that the virtue of solving this crisis on the side of developing your identity is that you'll develop the virtue of fidelity, loyalty, um, the ability to commit to someone else is part of that loyalty, right? So being able to commit to your friends, being able to commit to a romantic partner, being able to commit to a career. These kinds of things come out of that identity crisis if you solve it on the positive side. He said the negative side, you would develop a pathology he called repudiation, where sort of it's a little bit what we would call nihilistic. Everything's bad, nothing's good, nothing's worth working for. No one is trustworthy enough for me to invest my fidelity into. Like you're on the road to sort of heavy negativity with repudiation. Um, if you don't successfully resolve the identity crisis, according to Erickson, you can end up with identity problems throughout adulthood where you're not really sure what you value or what's important to you, not really sure what kind of lifestyle you want to commit to, not sure whether you want any friends, let alone the ones that you have. Are they good? Are they fulfilling your needs in the way that you need? Are you being a good friend to other people? So he said over your adult lifespan, you would see these repercussions of, a lack of a solid identity. Now, one of the things that he was very strong about was the idea that you need to have a good solid identity before you move to the next stage, which is the intimacy versus isolation conflict, right? So you need to have a good solid identity. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because he was very confident that you have to have your identity first, then you move to the intimacy crisis and work on that. Um, so you need to know solidly who you are before you can become truly loyal to other people. So when we talk about friendships, for example, we would like a friendship that we develop in our adolescence to probably stick with us through adulthood, right? Isn't that kind of what you thought when you were making friends when you were 13, 14, 17 years old? You kind of thought, oh, these are friends who I'll probably be friends with for life. In fact, maybe when you were graduating high school, if you have so far, you might have had conversations with friends from high school. We'll be friends forever, we'll always be friends. These kinds of commitments that we make to friends that we made in adolescence. But according to Erickson, we can't really set up that social convoy in adolescence because we don't even know who we are, right? So he's saying you can't really be truly intimate with a friend. You can't truly be loyal to a friend until you have established your own identity. Is that Does that describe your experience as a person growing up and having friends and so on, that you just because you don't know who all the details of yourself that you haven't really made any true friendships? I don't know if that makes sense. Siblings are a really important type of social convoy for a lot of us. We grow up with them, and oftentimes there's rivalry. One being bigger and stronger might be more annoying and taking more advantage of us, things like that. What they find in research is that siblings oftentimes are sort of touchstone relationships where maybe there are times where we're not as close or as tight, but they are when there's big events, we come back together. Um, Maybe the death of a parent or some kind of tragedy has occurred. A lot of times siblings will pull closer together. Um, as people age, their siblings on average become more important to them, and the relationship becomes more friendship like, and really like tight friendship, and they spend more time together. So siblings are an example of a social convoy. If you're lucky enough to have siblings, this is one person who will move through life with you, right? Will have known you when you were little, know you when you got older, know you as you're an adult. Like that sibling will move through being part of your social convoy, and they're usually pretty reliable like that because they are part of the family. So you can't completely call siblings a friend, because friends can come and go, but siblings are sort of to a certain extent stuck. And that gives you a little bit of confidence to grow, develop, try things out with siblings in ways that maybe you wouldn't do with friends. Um, we do know that siblings become closer as they go through major milestones of life. Like as children are born, now you've become, let's say you're not the one who had the child, let's say your sibling did. Well, now they've changed your status in life forever because they made you an aunt or an uncle. Um, if you had a child, of course, now you're a parent, and now your sibling is interested in your children in a way that they may not have even expected to be interested in them. Um, if one of you gets divorced or loses your spouse, that oftentimes will bring siblings closer. If somebody in the family dies, that oftentimes brings siblings closer. So there's some big, like I said, flexion points that oftentimes will bring siblings closer. For some families, as their parents age and start needing care, there can be tension from that, where maybe one sibling is doing maybe more of the hands-on care and doesn't feel like the other sibling or siblings is doing their part are doing their part. Um, Sometimes the other sibling who's not doing hands-on care says, "But I'm sending you financial support every month," and the one who's doing the hands-on is like, "Yes, but I never get a break." And this can be like sources of conflict. And so some of the flexion points bring the siblings closer, and some of them can be a wedge. What about regular friends who aren't our siblings? I'm sure you all know what a friend is. The fact that we choose them oftentimes makes them like the most important part of our social convoy, right? The fact that it is something that you could walk away from. You don't have to be friends with your friends. There's no um, biology involved in it. There's no, license that you obtained at the marriage office and we all signed it, and, somebody sanctified. Like, then none of that happened. You choose to be friends with your friends. Like, every day it's a choice to be friends with your friends. Some of our friends become what we call fictive kin, which is where our friend has really just become part of the family. And maybe even our extended family refers to them that way, right? Our extended family might have accepted our friend into the family to such an extent that they are just part of the family. That kind of commitment gives a sense of security in the friendship that's kind of like the sibling kind of relationship, where no matter what, this person, even if you have a big fight and even though you don't see eye to eye on certain things or whatever, that this person's going to stick with you because they basically are part of the family now. So we call that fictive kin. Maybe you've had members of the family that are not really in the family, but you call them aunt or uncle or cousin or something. Now you have a fancy term for it: fictive kin. So why do we seek out friends? What does friendship do for us that other kinds of relationships don't? For one thing, they help us to become better selves, right? When we offend our friend, there's self-reflection that occurs. Maybe there's a period where we go through and we're angry and we're telling everybody else we know about all the ways in which our friend wronged us. And then, but with self-reflection, we start to think, okay, well, maybe, possibly, I might have done something wrong. It helps us to grow. It helps us to become a more mature and more adult and better person. Our friends may help us to grow in our careers. They might encourage us to take that risk and apply for that, promotion, or to approach our boss and ask for a raise, or um, they might encourage us to go on and get that degree that maybe we were doubting that we could go on and do, but our friends tell us you can do it. You've got it in you. You try out for that team. I remember when I was in high school, my friend was a really good swimmer. She She loved to swim. I'm like, why aren't you on the swim team? And she goes, oh, I'd probably never make it. I can't do it. It took me and a couple of other ones of our friends to go, come on, you're the best swimmer we know. Go do it. She wasn't the fastest swimmer, but she had a lot of endurance. So they put her on the 500-yard freestyle, and she was great. And she loved it. And she had a really good time being on the team. But I don't know if she would have ever, of her own volition, ever joined the team if we hadn't kind of peer pressured her. We weren't on the team. We just knew that she was a good swimmer. If we hadn't peer pressured her into it, I don't know if she would have ever joined, right? We can oftentimes push our peers, our friends, into being better than they would be if we weren't there cheering them on. Carl Rogers, if you remember him, he says that friends provide a growth promoting climate. That having friends oftentimes helps us to be better than we would have been. Like, for example, let's look at this picture of these older people playing bridge or whatever they're doing. I don't know why there's no table in front of them. I have a feeling these are stunt people. Um, a lot of times you'll find that people dress better when they're meeting their friends, right? The ladies have done their hair and put on an outfit. The man's got his button up shirt on. They're like maybe would have been in sweats today, but they're going to see their friends, and it helps them to sort of do more than they would have done. That's just a superficial thing to talk about, sort of cleaning up because you're going to go see your friends. But it's one of those things that helps us to sort of go beyond what we might have done left to our own devices. Um, I had a friend in high school who she loved to do stuff but didn't generate the ideas very often. Like honestly, not that. She had one particular idea that we would do. That's true. But a lot of times, going somewhere or doing something new was at the idea of somebody else, and she was always on board to do it if somebody said, "Hey, let's go to the beach," or "Hey, let's go bike riding," or "Hey, let's do something." She'd always go, "Okay," but rarely ever generated it herself, right? So this is the sort of like we kind of do more than we would have, right, on our own. We become better people than we might have otherwise. When Rogers says that friends promote our growth, he's oftentimes talking about sort of his model for what we need to become our best self. And so we need genuineness. Boy, isn't that one of the biggest sources of conflict in adolescent friendships is when you feel like your friend hasn't been genuine. Maybe you've had one of these situations where one of the friends is being accused of being fake, right? Or being two-faced. Um, I can't think of other terms that we used to use for people who sort of weren't being genuine. You sort of expect that out of friends, don't you? You expect them to be their real selves with you, open with their own feelings, self disclosing, being their real self. And that's one of the key components that Roger says that we need from other people to help us to grow and develop into our best selves. We need to feel a sense of unconditional positive regard, right? We need to feel like our friends are willing to give us grace when we make mistakes. Um, that they still value us even though they know that we're not perfect, and even though that they know that we've maybe hurt their feelings in the past, or left them out in the past or something like that. They value us even though we are fallible. So that unconditional positive regard, you're still a lovable person even if you have fallen short of perfection, right? And then empathy. The third thing that Rogers says that we need from our parents or we need to receive from our therapist, he says we tend to get from our friends. We have people, our peers oftentimes will share our feelings, mirror our feelings. He says listening is one of the most potent forces for change that I know, right? A friend who just hears us while we're sort of ranting, and maybe for the third time we're telling them the same story, but they just hear us out. And they go, oh, that, I know. I'm sorry, honey, um, or that must have sucked, or whatever. Just showing us empathy, I can understand how you feel, is a really important factor. And so you've got these three things that Rogers says that we needed to get from our parents growing up, that if you were to enter into a client therapist relationship, you need to get from your therapist. And here we tend to get it from our friends. If we're not getting it from our friends, we may think this is not truly a friend. This is not a person who's worthy of my investment because they're not being real with me. Maybe they're fake, or they keep judging me. They're not showing me unconditional positive regard, or they just don't seem to get what I'm talking about. That, they're not showing me empathy. And so Rogers argues that good friends tend to show us what we need for us to personally grow. When we have what is so called a friend that's not showing us those things, they probably are not truly our friend. Improved self esteem is another benefit of friendship. You know, there's this strong drive to belong. We've talked about this before in class that belonging is, go back to Maslow, right? Belongingness is one of our really big motives. And so it builds our self esteem when we feel like we belong. We feel good about ourselves when other people have chosen us, have chosen to spend time with us, have chosen to trust us, have chosen to invest, in us as people. There's an old Zulu saying that a person is a person through other persons. So you only sort of become a human as a function of how other people regard you and treat you. Um, Having a friend, having been chosen by someone, boosts the odds of being is boosted. The odds of being chosen is boosted by engaging in what we call self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is a tendency that some of us do more than others. Some of us are very high in self-monitoring, others of us are low, most of us are in the middle. We're sort of, sometimes we self-monitor and sometimes we don't. But self-monitoring is when we sort of observe ourselves as if from outside and sort of judge our own actions and judge the way that we're coming off or the gestures that we're making or how our hair looks today or those kinds of things. People who are really high in self monitoring might be inhibited because they're so self-critical. People who are really low in self-monitoring might be maybe offensive to some people because they're not taking it, they don't really read the room. They don't really take into consideration what's going on and they may behave inappropriately. Most people are sort of in the middle. They can kind of read the room, but they're not so high in self-monitoring that they're inhibited. So self-monitoring. So you can, if you want to find out your level of self-monitoring, I put a scale on the Canvas homepage that you can take if you want to check that out. It's not in our book. The other thing that can be a big benefit of friendship is it gives us opportunities to be the one who is being empathetic, gives us the opportunity to be the one who's offering a helping hand. So not only do we need that from our friends, we need opportunities to give that to people. And so friends give us that opportunity. So definite benefits to having friends. All right, let's go ahead and stop here. We'll come back in the next video and we'll talk about some sex differences that have been observed in friendships.